Hi, and welcome to the Baru. My name is Charlotte Bain, and in today's chat, I am speaking with Dr. Marc Bekoff. He is a professor emeritus of ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Colorado Boulder, a former Guggenheim Fellow, and the author of more than 30 books. His landmark work, The Emotional Lives of Animals, first published in 2007, made the case, backed by rigorous science, that animals do indeed experience joy, grief, empathy, and love. So nearly 20 years later, with a newly revised edition and a foreword by his close friend and collaborator, Jane Goodall, what was once considered radical is now widely accepted science. So let's just jump into this chat. So nice to meet you. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
So you're in Colorado? Boulder. Do you live in Boulder? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I wanted to have you on because this season I'm focused on the human-animal bond. It's in honor of my pup Chance, who passed away after almost 18 years of us together. And I just finished the episode prior to this one. I'm sharing my story, kind of how the deep mutual connection that we had, the emotional bond, and what I learned from him and what he taught me. So what I'd love is to dive kind of into what the science may actually show about all of those things that I was feeling and all of those things that I was showing, if that makes sense.
I never know where to start on this other than to say that, dogs and humans, but dogs and other non-humans and humans and non-humans other than dogs
Yeah.
can form really deep bonds,
Yeah.
enduring bonds.
Yeah.
And I like to think of the bonds as being reciprocal,
Sure.
give and take relationships, two-way streets.
Yeah.
Of course, it depends on who the other animal is. So now focusing on dogs, where the dog and the human live,
Yeah.
um, the personality of the human, the personality of the dog, because it's really, an interaction. And I think of emotions as being what I call a social glue,
Yeah.
that really glues the different individuals. It could be more than two individuals together. Um, and that, a lot of what goes on between humans and other animals is really multisensorial, if you will, I think the word. But, we tend to forget that sometimes when a dog does something and a person will say, well, I didn't do anything. Why did my dog do that? Well, you may have uttered something that the dog heard that you didn't even know you uttered, or it's olfactory. Dogs really have very keen noses,
Yeah.
so the relationship is, in ethology, we call them composite signals, the contribution of, say, sight, sound, and smells,
Sure.
and they work with one another in tandem sometimes. Um, so I think that one of the things I like to say is that, the relationship between a human and a dog can be much more complex than we think it is,
Yeah.
but it also could be much simpler than we think it.
Okay.
So I don't
Okay.
wanna
Yeah.
complex it out of, reality, if you will. There's lots of studies that show dogs read us very well,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of studies that show we read dogs very well, but maybe not as well as we think we do.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't
when
think we read them as well as we think we do, and I think that's the part of what we need to start working on, right?
Yeah, and that's why always write about the importance of being fluent in dog or dog literate.
Yeah.
I always think when a s well, it could I used to say when a person or a family get their first dog,
Yeah.
that they have to take, like, a course in Dog 101.
Uh-huh.
Um, maybe I've actually suggested it to humane societies and rescue centers
Uh-huh.
that you just put together a little, it could even be a cheat sheet,
Yeah.
you know, The problem is that if you say, well, if the tail is wagging this way, the dog is happy, really free, but it's
Yeah.
not necessarily the case.
Right.
So simplifying it, but I do think that simplifying it a bit would make it better for the dog, and anything that's better for the dog is better for the human,
Right.
and vice versa. It's a win-win for all when we become fluent in dog and your dog becomes fluent in human, especially, um, say fluent in human with the humans with whom they're living. Because we all give off different signals. I
Sure.
could do something and you might interpret it as being, either pro-social positive or not, or, negative.
Yeah.
Um, but others who know me would say, no, that's just how he communicates, some kind of closeness or whatever. So being fluent in the individual dog, is important, and then the dog being fluent in the individual human.
Right.
Um, and, the other thing I always push is that I spend and have spent a lot of time looking at free running dogs. So
Mhm.
some are free ranging out in the wild, some
Mhm.
feral, but some at dog parks where the dog has agency.
Yeah.
The dog has the ability to make choices,
Mhm.
and the human with whom they are visiting is open to allowing the dog to give consent. So those eh, and context. So I call those the
Sure.
3 C words, but I think they're really important because I think the happiest humans I know and the happiest dogs I know, have lots of choices, so they have agency.
Yep.
They have to give
Absolutely.
consent.
Mhm.
It can't always be the case, but,
Right.
you'd like it to be the rule of the road is that you get mutual consent as much as possible and context. So
Yeah.
what you might accept at home, you might not accept at a dog park or vice versa, or in another person's home.
Right.
So once again, a lot of people say, "Oh, don't bore me with it. It's all too complex." But it's not really. We do that with other humans with whom we form close relationships, or we decide we don't want a close relationship.
Yeah.
Um, but the dog, people say, well, the dogs can't consent. Well, of course they can consent. I mean,
Yeah.
if you ask a dog to do something and the dog doesn't do it and runs away, tucks their tail, or
Sure.
just refuses, they're not necessarily being hard to get or, just being, really obnoxious. It might be they really don't want to do something because they're afraid
Yeah.
or they
Yep.
can't do it.
Or they can't do it. Yeah.
They just, and so,
Or they're
so
confused about what you're asking them to do.
yes. So that's another big thing
Yeah.
that a lot of times the humans' voices and their body language are really, the opposite.
Yeah. They don't
You know,
match up. Yep.
they don't match up, and the dogs, once again, depending on the dog, but your average dog, I think, would be very confused because they're sending contradictory signals.
Mhm.
And the dog is just saying, "Well, I think you want me to come closer. I think you want me to leave you alone. I think you want me to do something else, but I don't know because you're sending off these complicated mixed signals."
Right.
Um,
Well, you have spoken about kind of the shift away from, and you've written about the shift away from dominance dog training,
no,
um,
yeah.
and how that adversely affects the relationship that we have with our dogs. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, what I really mean is, you could think of it, on, your own. The humans.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't happen a lot, but I've met humans who they scare me. They just do.
Of
So if
course.
they
Yeah.
ask me to do something, and I don't mean only physically, but in terms
Yeah.
of, being
Their energy, their
obnoxious,
vibe. Yeah.
their energy and their vibes.
Yep.
Well, yeah, sometimes I'll just do it because I don't wanna get into a pissing match with them. I'm not a dog. I don't do pissing matches,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, and so dogs and other animals would be the same way. So I've heard people say, "Look, my dog does anything I want them to do."
Yeah.
And then when I dig it a little deeper, I discover that they've used, e-collar training, they've used forced training.
Yep. Mhm.
So sure, they'll do anything you want them to do because they're stressed and they're scared,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? So, um I mean, it works for the human, it doesn't work for the dog, you know,
Yes.
so
The human can feel like they're in some sort of control, even though it's a false sense of control, where as the dog, the dog is reacting to that false sense of control with fear, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fear and stress,
Mm.
anxiety, uncertainty. Well, I think you're asking me to do this, so I did it, but that's not what you want. So you're slapping me or you're shocking me or something like that.
Yeah.
Why don't you just tell me clearly what you want me to do? And
Yeah.
if I can do it, I'll do it.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a submissive way. It's just, dogs can be very compliant if they
Yeah.
know what's going on.
Sure.
You know,
Sure.
and I've always felt that way, but it was over the last decade or maybe 2 or 3 where I would describe a situation. A couple were that I had, but that other people have had, and I would think, "Well, I'm not a trainer, so it's impossible for me to give you any advice," but I wouldn't say it to them, "It's impossible for me to see how some assertiveness
Yeah.
wouldn't work." But you
Right.
can be assertive in a non I mean, we do it with other people. You can be assertive or state your point of view in a non-forceful, aggressive way and
Yeah.
stuff. So I remember that it was not quite an aha moment, but I described a situation when I lived in the mountains there was a lot of land, there weren't that many homes, there were tons of dogs on my road, and they would come down to my house because I would feed them, and they didn't have to have leashes or collars. There was very little traffic. I mean, they were safe, never
Hmm.
had a problem. There were, cougars and black bears around,
Uh-huh.
so there were predators, but my neighbor moved up there. She got a dog, it wasn't her first dog, and she got, a shock collar.
Hmm.
I only learned later that she really had not turned it on. There was a vibration and a sound,
Yeah.
and I thought, "Okay." So, one trial learning, and what she did was, because she knew that I worked on dogs and that I didn't like that stuff, she put it around her own neck.
Yeah.
She did to herself what she did to the dog. One trial learning, and for the next 8 years, that dog had the life of Riley, could run all over, free, on a lot of land, a lot of
Yeah.
acreage, including my house. So I
Interesting.
described that to a dog trainer who makes her living doing dog training and using positive force-free training,
Hmm.
and she said, "Okay, that would be an example where when I hear about it, I feel better since the woman put it on herself and it was one trial." But she said, "I could have had that dog do that without ever
Yeah.
collaring him."
Yeah. Right.
Great. I'm
Right.
not a trainer. I never would
Right.
have thought of the way she did it, you
Right.
know? So
Right.
so yes, I'm definitely, and just traveling a lot and meeting a lot of different people with a lot of different dogs and going to dog parks. I I see, and, once again, I've sometimes would, take down numbers where the dogs who are treated with respect for whom they are sentient beings,
Yeah.
they just seem happier. They
Yeah.
seem more compliant, you
Yeah.
know? And so when I get to know people at the dog park, some better than others, I'll talk to them about it. And I mean, just across the board, y- the people who say, I say, "Do you think your dog is happy?" I don't say he or she
Yeah.
looks happy when they do, or they don't. Yeah, they are. I
Yeah.
said, "Do they listen to you?" Yeah.
Hmm.
Will they tell you when they don't want to do something? Yeah. Are you
Hmm.
willing to work with them? Yeah. And those are the dogs who seem to have the most agency
Hmm.
and are given the most opportunities to agree or consent with their human when they're asked to do something, even if it's something they don't want to do. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a mutual, it seems like they've built a mutual trust with each other.
And I was going to get to the 2 words, trust and safety.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
trust the human,
Yeah.
and they believe in dog belief way that the, human is keeping them safe. And when I lived in the mountains, there were times when I would just have to yell,
Yeah.
"No," because the dogs were running free, and they would have sensed, say, the presence of a bear or a
Yeah.
cougar before I did, but they were playing and having fun.
Yeah.
So they were oblivious to that anything other than the 4 or 5 dogs with whom they were playing and
Right.
running around and,
Right.
doing zoomies.
Yeah.
But but that's the way it goes. Because somebody once said, "Well, you shouldn't ever tell your dog no." And I'm thinking, you know, uh, it I could tell you no in a nice way. "No, please don't do that,"
Yeah.
and stuff. So I don't agree with that.
And
But
also, again,
what's
back to the safety issue, I think if it's an
is
emergency safety issue, but if you
what
overuse anything, then it loses its power, right? So, like if you're
I
overusing no every 5 seconds and everything's a no, if someone said no to you every 5 seconds, I mean, how much would you feel inside?
no,
I
it
would feel
is
pretty crappy and I would be diminished and I would feel,
right, and so would a dog.
yeah,
When I would hang out at the dog parks, I did a lot of just sort of pilot studies of things. So I was collecting data, on how often people said no or stop or don't do that versus just, "Good dog.
yeah,
Hi, how are you?"
yeah,
And I had about 300 examples. 85% of the time, people were saying things to stop the dog from being a dog.
yeah, yep,
Not and I don't mean I mean, firm nose, "Stop that."
yeah, yeah,
Even in situations when it was clear that the dog was not doing anything to, um, harm themselves or other dogs or
right,
people,
right,
and so about 5%, I call them spontaneous good dogs. Only about 5 out of well, not 5%, 5 out of 300 just actually said, "Good dog." And I
yeah,
remember I told my dog when I had a dog or I was with my friend's dog, I said, "Good dog." And the person said, "Why'd you say good dog? They didn't do anything." And I said, "Well, they don't have to do anything for them to know that I could say I love them, but I have a strong bond and I care for them."
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that was freaky, and I wrote an article for Psych Today because I write for them called "Helicopter Parenting
Oh,
Dogs."
interesting. Yep.
I I have gotten so many emails about over that, including a few people who actually did little score sheets like I did, and we were right about in the 5%, that people spontaneously say "good dog" just because you love your dog.
Yeah.
It's like saying to a human being, "You're
Yeah.
really a nice woman. You're really a nice guy."
Yeah. Like, I
You don't have
enjoy
to,
being with you. Yeah.
yeah, right. You don't have to have
Reason.
a reason. I mean, the
Yeah.
reason could be that you enjoy being with them. It's not because they bought you a cup of coffee
Right. Right.
or something like that. Um, but yeah, the safety and trust things that I think have to be really buried deeply into the dog's heart and head.
Yeah.
They just have to know you care for them,
Yeah.
and they do. By the way, people will say, "Oh, that's being anthropomorphic," which I don't even know what that means anymore, or
Yeah.
"That's just self-serving."
Right.
No, I've watched I mean, I've done 8.5-year studies on wild coyotes, I've studied penguins in Antarctica, birds, foxes, I've seen the
Wow.
wolves in Yellowstone. They know when another individual is cares for them and cares about their safety so that they could trust them with their well-being.
Yeah.
They do, and they know it of other animals too.
Right. Right. I want to circle back to your work a little bit because you you have said that it's not radical to really understand and respect the emotional lives of animals, right? And
Yes.
so when you started this work, I mean, it was over 30
Uh,
years ago?
50.
50 years ago.
No, really.
What over 50 years ago, what was the belief then? Because it has shifted quite a bit. We're now we it's common to talk about dogs and to connect with dogs and all of those things. But, back then it was a different belief. So what was happening then?
Yeah, it's almost like a black white situation.
Yeah.
I mean, when I started doing this work, so I was really good friends with Jane Goodall, and she
Yes.
had a very
Yes.
strong influence on my life personally and professionally.
Yeah.
So I was beginning grad school. She was beginning her work at Gombe, and she was naming the chimpanzees and talking about individual personalities.
Mhm.
And my work and what I'm doing really started decades ago when I was like 3 years old on the streets of Brooklyn.
Wow.
Because my folks were great. I would go outside, I'd talk to the dogs and cats and mice and ants and birds.
Mhm.
We had that requisite goldfish on the kitchen counter that
Yep.
everyone had at the time, and I would actually talk to the goldfish, and my parents didn't stop me, although I think they thought I was a little bizarre. But, but no, the reason I say that, so years later, I was talking to my folks and thanking them for being the people they were, and we were talking about my animal connection, and the phrase "minding animals" came up, and I wrote a
Mhm.
book called Minding Animals that
Yes.
was published in 2002, and my dad and mom said, "Well, you were minding animals when you were 3 years old." I was attributing minds to them. I could feel their feelings. I
Yeah.
could feel their intellectual capacities, and I was minding them in terms of caring for them.
Yeah.
So that's really what led me through a very nonlinear college career and
Mhm.
into grad school and into a PhD, MD program for a while. And then I just wanted to just watch animals.
Yeah.
And so I don't believe in coincidences. But what happened was I just decided I just I didn't want to be in the hardcore scientific, well, I shouldn't say that, the biomedical science
Right. Okay.
industry. Um, and I went to Washington University in St. Louis for my undergraduate degree. And years ag and soon after that, when I decided I just wanted to really study animal behavior, I came across um, the Washington University yearly magazine.
Okay. Yeah.
Not This was before the internet. People say, "Oh,
Yeah.
did you find it on the
Yeah.
internet?" The internet was not even
Before
thought
the
of.
internet, that's
It
crazy talk.
wasn't being texted,
Yeah.
you weren't sending attachments. But I was very lucky. I started work, so I immediately called,
Okay.
and wrote to a guy named Michael Fox, who's been doing canid studies for decades.
Yeah.
And he was an ethologist like I wanted to be. And so I got into a grad program with him, and this would have been a little more than a decade after Jane started her work.
Yeah.
And, we'd had long talks about naming animals, assigning personalities, um, and doing detailed observations, because that's really the basis of ethology.
Yeah.
And Michael was right on board. But like when Jane came out of the field, she was told by the scientists, mostly men, at Cambridge University in England, "Well, we don't name animals and we don't assign personalities." And I don't think she said, "Well, I do," but she
Yeah.
did. And that really laid the groundwork for me, because I would say to Mike Fox, I said, "I'm gonna name all these animals I'm studying, and we're gonna talk about personalities." And it was like, "Well, if you went outside, you're gonna get wet." Of
Yeah.
course you are.
Yeah. Do you
Um,
think they didn't name the animals because they either they didn't see them as having emotional lives and personalities, or they didn't wanna have a connection with them?
yeah, that's a great question, Charlotte. Both.
Yeah.
For some, they had to know they had different personalities.
Yeah.
But there's an African proverb, and I don't remember it verbatim, but it's basically once you name an animal, you have a special relationship
Yep.
and special obligations to that individual.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so I was doing that, and then in the mid to late '70s, Donald Griffin wrote a book called The Question of Animal
Mhm.
Awareness, and he was a National Academy of Science. He was a member of the National Academy of Sciences. As an undergraduate, he discovered echolocation in his dorm room at Harvard by just stringing guitar strings across the room and noticing that bats avoided them. I mean,
Oh,
you talk
interesting.
about simple ethology.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but I was in meetings, and actually, a woman just wrote a paper about it. I was about Don Griffin, where people thought he lost his mind.
Oh.
He was a very dignified person, a world-renowned scientist, and he started talking about the evolution of consciousness and self-awareness.
Mhm.
And to me, it
Mhm.
was second nature. Well, of course you are. So there was
Mhm.
a lot of resistance to that back then by
Yeah.
behaviorists,
Interesting.
people who followed Skinner, Descartes,
Yep.
that,
Mhm.
animals were just stimulus response machines. But I just decided I was not going to change what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So there were costs and benefits. The costs were people thought I was just, flaky and loose and wasn't doing real science. I mean, people would say that about me, Michael
Oh,
Fox. Some
interesting.
people said it about Jane Goodall and others. Well, they're not really doing real science. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, I'm doing real science. I'm collecting data. I'm doing statistical analysis. In 1986, Jane wrote a book called The Chimpanzees of Gombe that is one of the most thorough data driven books ever written on
Wow.
chimpanzees.
Wow.
But I persisted, not to be stubborn, but I persisted because I thought I was right. I thought Don Griffin was right, Michael Fox, and a few others,
Mhm.
that you just, I used to say, do you live with a dog? Uh-huh. Have you ever lived with two dogs? I had two dogs in succession.
Yep.
Uh-huh. Were they the same? Oh, no. Well, I mean, regardless of breed, and for a lot of
Yeah.
people, they get the same breed or mix of dog.
Yep.
I said, so they had different personalities. A lot of people would say, yeah, you're right. Some people would say, well, no, they don't have personalities. So I said, well, if you're talking about a shy dog versus a bold dog, right?
Mhm.
Or we call it neophilic dog who likes new things, neophobic, they're afraid of new things.
Yeah.
You are talking about their personality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I said, do you name your dogs? Yeah. And so, I mean, it took a while. I mean, it took a while. Well, then why can't you name, wild animals? But in the first edition of my book, The Emotional Lives of Animals, I talk about a scientist and his dog, but I don't really name them as they were.
Ah.
So the guy picks me up at the airport. We got a couple of hours. He said, let's go home. You love dogs. I'll introduce you to my dog. My dog misses me when I'm gone. He smiles. He's happy. He does all the things that dogs do.
Yeah.
And then I gave my talk that night, and he stood up and said, well, you've been talking a lot about, emotions and personalities, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but do you really feel comfortable doing that? So my answer was, well, you felt comfortable doing it 3 hours ago when I was at your house. And I
Right.
didn't mean it as an insult. The guy
Right.
was a great guy. Got quiet really fast.
Yeah.
And what I was saying was, well, why is it okay for you to talk about your companion dog that way, but get upset when somebody gives a public lecture or writes an article for a professional journal, names their dogs and talks about personalities? And that would have been about 20 years ago. But things have really changed.
Yeah.
There's a lot more, tons of more research. But the fact is, and I've had some really I mean, I feel I'm a hardcore scientist,
Yeah.
but I've had some people who really worry about, being anthropomorphic or,
Right.
being too free, agree with me. So when I wrote the second edition of The Emotional Lives of Animals came out 2 years ago, and while I was writing it, I kept track of new research
Mhm.
that either disputed findings in the field of animal emotions or said that, we really don't have to treat some animals in the way we think we should.
Right.
So I had a yes and a no column. There was nothing in the no column. And I really
Yeah.
mean that, even
Yeah.
applying standards. There was nothing done in the last 20, and, I added some earlier references, but give or take 20 years that disputed attributing emotions to animals or said that we are doing we're doing more than we need to about their well-being. And I kept a little separate chart about dogs because so I had a long talk with a few people, and I made a comment, and I make a comment in the second edition that we don't need more data to change our ways and treat dogs and other animals with respect.
Right.
So some people took that as anti-science. It wasn't meant to be anti-science. What I was saying is that very little that we've learned in the last 25 or 30 or 40 years would unleash us on animals, especially
Right.
lab animals who we torture, to
Yeah.
say that it's okay to do that.
Right.
So
Right.
I think slowly over time, but I would really say my experiences over the last, say, 10 years, whatever, 8, 12 years, have been that a lot of the skeptics have really come around, if you will, to saying and agreeing that, all vertebrates, a lot of invertebrates, there's
Mhm.
people working on sentience in plants,
Yeah.
um, that we really need to keep the door open
Yeah.
to who they are, what they know, and what they feel. And there's nothing lost by doing that.
Right.
So
Right. Why
that's,
is that why is that threatening to some, do you think? I feel like it's
um,
threatening to some.
well, I think it's threatening to some because if you agree that these animals have deep feelings, you can't do the things you do to them in a lab.
Right.
It's
Right.
threatening because there's just a lot of people who write about human exceptionalism, and
Yes.
they view humans as above and apart from other animals, not
Yeah.
only above them on some smooth scale, but
Yeah.
separate from.
Yeah.
Um, so I think I You know, I think those feelings are basically history. Every now and
Yeah.
again, somebody will come along and say, "Well, you don't really know that." I mean, I had somebody ask me, "Well, you don't really know that dogs enjoy playing." So I said, "Well, if you really want to be hardcore about it, I don't, but I don't really know that you enjoy playing."
Right.
And they and he said, "Well, I can tell you." And I said, "So can dogs."
Yeah.
I mean, I can't, I mean, we've all been wrong about attributing certain emotional states to other humans.
Yeah.
We think they're happy and they're not. We think they're grieving and they're not. So, yeah, we can make quote mistakes with dogs, but they're not as voluminous as people think they are. And I've
Right.
had so many people tell me, including dog guardians who wanna be what one woman said, "I just wanna be more scientific about it." Just
So interesting.
describe her dog, describe her reaction to what was happening, and learn that the dog wasn't using her, the dog wasn't pulling her leg, the dog
Right.
was really in a
Wasn't out
state
to get
of,
her. Yeah.
yeah, oh, right, or using her for food.
Yeah.
Um, the dog really was in a bad way, although if you didn't know the dog, you might not know the dog was in a bad way,
Right.
you know? So what I'm excited about now, literally just today, is that people are doing non-invasive work. There's a lot of citizen science being done on dogs that's
Great.
supporting the fact that dogs are deeply sentient, highly intelligent, highly emotional beings.
Yeah.
And they're not using you if they refuse, you know, uh, they're not using you if you ask them to do something and they're stubborn.
Right.
I mean, they might be testing you,
Right.
but, this, and this comes down to what we were, starting about is, it's like people say, well, if I'm not the alpha,
Mhm.
then my dog will run, you know, they'll
Right.
just run over me.
Right.
No, they won't.
No, they
Um,
won't.
wolf packs are very high, it can be highly structured. There are alpha males and females, but alpha isn't synonymous with dominance or aggression.
Let's
And
explain that a little bit, because I think that's a common thought. When you think of alpha, you think of somebody who's tough, who's in charge, who's a semi-bully, you know?
yeah, no, it means that, well, there's been a number of studies, but alpha individuals in a lot of groups receive the most attention.
Okay.
And decades ago, one of the grad students with whom I shared my office with, Michael Fox, did a study of captive wolves in Point Barrow, Alaska. By moving wolves around of a pack, he put up a piece of plywood so that the wolves in the pack couldn't see the one missing member.
Okay.
And when the alpha wolf was the one missing, they showed the most attention by trying to look over the board or around the board.
Okay.
So there's a theory of dominance called attention structure.
Mhm.
Um, it's been tested a number of times. I believe it works. Some people found it didn't, but the basis of that is that when you're the dominant animal, you have more freedom of movement
I see.
because others are watching you more than you watch them. And I know that applies in some human groups.
Yeah.
So it doesn't depend on being aggressive and dominant or I'll beat you up. It means that you have more freedom of movement um, because others are watching where you are going.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, you might control the group in terms of movement.
Right.
um, you might have a little more, if you will, influence over um, what the other animals are doing and where they're doing it. So
Yeah.
you could look at that as being dominant, but it's not being dominant because you're going to threaten them or beat them up.
Yeah.
So I like to think of alpha, and there's been a mistaken view in the dog literature, which shocked me not 15 years ago, where people say that there aren't alpha wolves and wolves can't be dominant.
Right.
No, that's not true. Dave Meese never said that. And Rick McIntyre, he's the wolf guru in the world, and he's just published recently his 5th book, and the series is called The Alpha Wolves of Yellowstone.
Okay.
He's not using the word alpha as dominant, aggressive,
Right.
murderous or anything like that.
Right. Do as I
Mm.
say. Yeah.
Right, do as I say or I'll beat you up.
Yeah.
So and I really believe this, and I'm a pretty good ethologist, and I've studied a lot of animals.
Yeah.
There's Using the word alpha is a descriptive term, but it's not one that invites you to think about aggressive and threatening and fighting
Yes.
and killing and wounding other individuals.
Right.
Um, and there's been a lot of work done now on free-ranging dog packs, some feral dog packs. There's an individual in many of them who would be the highest ranking.
Mm-hmm.
If you call him or her it could be a female, the alpha wolf, you're not suggesting they're the most aggressive or injurious. And when you say they dominate what other animals do, you're not suggesting that they're dominating them because if you don't do this, I'll beat you up. So I like to just use the word influence. If you and I are walking towards
Mm-hmm.
one another
Mm-hmm.
and you move away to let me go or vice versa, people could say you're dominating me, but you're not intending to. It's just
Right.
I'm letting you go or you're letting me go.
Right. Right.
So I like to think of a synonym for the word dominance as you influence other individuals,
Yeah.
you know? And I can tell you right now that people who study these really believe that in addition to naming animals, in addition to talking about their personalities, and in addition to understanding that you can form social relationships, hierarchies, if you want, within a group, it's really opened the door to learning a lot more about social dynamics. It
Yeah.
just is,
Yeah.
so, um,
Do you
I
think they're more like I've read, more like as far as wolf packs are concerned, it's more like they're a parental figure. Like if you could make the equation.
it could be in some
Yeah.
instances, yeah.
Okay.
Um, Rick McIntyre wrote about, the importance of cooperation
Mm-hmm.
and that a very high-ranking female was the most cooperative.
Interesting.
Um, and somebody
Interesting.
said, "Well, yeah, that's because if they don't do it, she'll beat them up." No, not at all.
She'll just be highly
And there's a
disappointed.
whole and excuse me?
She'll just be highly disappointed like a mother.
Yeah, right. No, I mean, and there's a whole literature started by a guy named Robert Sussman, doing field work on primates, that
Hmm.
a huge percentage of their behavior was what we call prosocial or cooperative positive.
Okay.
Um, and and when you think about group dynamics, you know, there's got to be that mix. I think what it is cooperative pro-social behavior doesn't get the headlines like aggression and fighting. All major newscasts start out with divisive, hostile,
Right.
bloody stories because that's what grabs you.
Yeah.
But to say that cooperation, fairness, justice are important, it's not to say that on occasion animals don't harm one another. you'll see headlines in, about riots or something like that. Well, they were acting like animals. No, they weren't.
Mhm.
Um, and think about, you can't have
Interesting.
a
Yeah,
pack of 6 alpha wolves beating the hell out of one another. You can't have a pack of free-ranging or feral dogs, all high-ranking, beating one another up or not working harmoniously,
sure.
for, to have the stable, group or pack dynamics.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
and the way that translated over was when I started writing for Psychology Today, I started writing about alpha dogs, etcetera, and somebody wrote to me and said, "You're dumb." I mean, really, very nasty. There's no such thing as alpha individuals or dominant animals. No, no,
Interesting.
seriously, no
Yeah.
such thing. And I thought, well, given the fact that you've never studied animals,
Mhm.
um, you're hardly in a position to make that claim. So that actually got me motivated, if you will, to write articles like about the topics we're talking about,
Yeah.
and a lot of people understand. So I could, you could say, or I could say, well, I think neither of us would, but people would say, well, I'm the alpha pack member among the dogs in my house.
Yeah.
Well, that they're saying it because the dogs basically look up to them and do anything they want.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway,
I think that that all kind of got convoluted with, like, that terminology being integrated into, like, the dog training
I was
community.
it's exactly where I was
Because
going. Yeah.
that's where I was like, "Oh, there isn't, an alpha in nature," I was starting to get confused by
Yeah.
it, and I think it's just being careful with your words and
You're exactly right, Charlotte. I mean, they're using alpha with synonymous with shocking and
yeah,
hitting and hanging dogs.
yeah,
That's what they're using it because 'cause
yeah,
they're using it synonymously with the act of dominating,
yeah,
and you could say that if I'm walking to you or you're walking to me and I move, you've dominated me because you've made me change my way. To
yeah.
me, that would be a misuse of the term. I mean,
Totally. I would be like, "Oh,
I
that person needed some space."
space, right?
Yeah,
You
that
could
person
be
needed some
carrying a
space.
heavy
Yeah,
package or you could be taller than
totally.
me.
Yeah,
Right. So, no, and this is a really valuable conversation because I've done a number of them and I've had a lot of people write, say, thanks for clarifying that.
yeah, yeah,
And I said, well, it's because I'm a card carrying ethologist
yeah,
and there's no ethologist I know who would say that there's no such thing as a social relationship called dominance,
right,
but it's once again not if you don't move, I'll beat you up. If you don't leave me, if you don't
right,
move away from me and give me freedom of movement, I'll attack
right,
you and I'll bite your throat out. I mean,
right.
stuff like that. Anyway,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
got it. And I hope
I
you
got it.
listen. No, I hope you're listening because
Yeah.
it's a
Right.
really important difference to mark.
Right.
Given all the junk that's written in popular literature about being the leader of a pack, a dog, you
Right.
are the leader of the pack, and all the horrific stuff about aversive training that harms dogs.
Yeah.
And what you asked earlier on was really important. Yeah. I mean, you could have a dog doing anything you want, but if that dog, and you could also do the analogy with a person, if they're
Yeah.
doing what you want and yielding to you because they're afraid of you, that's not a healthy relationship.
It is not a healthy relationship. No.
And that's what and that's what the dog is suffering just like you might. Yeah.
Yeah. And there'll be repercussions of that. Either
Right.
I mean, if someone was doing it to me again, like either I would just start shutting down and not, or I would want to fight or like run away. So, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and the other thing that's so important about and I'll just make a few brief comments because
Yeah.
I've written about it because I'm a field worker. Is a lot of the research I wrote a paper a few years ago. What do all these dog studies mean? And I
Yeah.
wasn't writing it in a negative way, but there's people in different labs studying different dogs, different researchers, different protocols for reward, blah 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 blah,
Yeah.
and the results differ. it doesn't mean that one research project is better than the other. These are a lot of very bright scientists.
Yeah.
It just means context.
Yeah.
They're trying to study the same question, but once you start looking at different dogs, different personalities, different reward schedules, etc.,
Yeah.
and so I've studied free-ranging dogs a lot and free-ranging carnivores.
Yeah.
And one of the things that characterizes the free-ranging dogs, even like at a dog park, is they join or leave social interactions of their own accord because they
Yes.
can choose to join or decide, I don't want to be here and
Yeah.
leave the interaction.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of dogs can't do that, especially
Yeah.
dogs on a leash. Or people
Right.
say, "Oh, yeah, go play. Why aren't you playing?" "Well, I don't want to." "Well, go play."
And then they
"Oh, they
push
don't
them
want."
over there into play. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Or they can't, or if they're tethered or tied up, they can't get away from an interaction.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, I can't even tell you how many different interactions that resulted in one dog or coyote or wolf or red fox moving out of an interaction because in some way they were sensing they didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
Maybe they smelled a pheromone, maybe a
Oh,
dog growled at
interesting.
them, but we wouldn't have heard the vocalization.
Right.
Or maybe the dog cocked their eyes over, you know,
Right.
and this is why I love these conversations, is because if you really want to become fluent in dog or dog lyrid, you just got to watch these dogs
Yeah.
and watch your own dog and look at all the idiosyncrasies of how your dog, or if you lived with a series of dogs like I have, how they
Yeah.
all differ in telling you, I don't want to do this, or
Yeah.
I do want to do this, or
Yeah.
I don't like what you just did, or you could do the same thing and another dog is not disturbed by it at all.
Right.
So
Right.
anyway, yeah.
Yeah. I wanna switch gears a little bit and talk about your latest book,
Oh,
which
yes.
is
So, well,
Love
thank you.
in Their Hearts. Yeah, of course. And it just came out. I think it came out, like, yesterday or June 16th or something like that. It's
June 15th,
recently.
last Monday.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, the title itself feels like, it's in alignment with what you've studied, obviously, but that animals have emotions and that they have love, right? That they
Mhm.
they love. So,
Yep.
um what made you want to make that argument,
Yeah.
and what
Well,
inspired that book, essentially?
no, well, the book was really inspired by a lot of work I did with Jane and my
Yeah.
co-author who's written young adult books. So the book is a young adult book meant for readers, I don't know, 12 or 13 through high school.
Mhm.
But all the adults, teachers, parents, other adults who have read it, it they don't s- it's they really like it. It's getting great reviews because it's a very when I say simplistic, it's not watered down. You know, people said, "Well, is it a watered down book version of your book, The Emotional Lives of Animals?" No,
Right.
it's actually totally different.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
It's probably 99% different content and the way it's written. But we really wanted people to use what we know on animals' behalf.
Mhm.
So the subtitle is a celebration of animal emotions and a guide to compassionate action.
Yes.
And so it's written for, preteens and teens, but for anybody,
Yeah.
um, to basically use what we know on behalf of animals.
Yeah.
So it's updated even from the second edition of The Emotional Lives of Animals. There's a lot more references. There's also a lot more stories,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, all science-based, but really great stories about prankster chimpanzees, Cy Montgomery, who's a very famous writer, her relationship with Octavia, an octopus.
Oh,
Um,
would you share a little bit of that story? I'm so fascinated by octopus.
well, it's just all the trials and tribulations of meeting an octopus and getting the octopus to, if you will, become your friend.
Yeah.
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 Um, because, 'cause octopi, octopuses, I suppose, are really alien, I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of people who never lived with a dog or never formed a close relationship to a dog have seen and been up close and personal with the dogs.
Yeah, yeah.
But a
Yeah.
lot of people have never, and this is at the Boston Aquarium. Just a lot about language. We have a little stories about Alex, the parrot, Irene Pepperberg's pirate, who learned addition and subtraction and could, basically do math better than I
Yeah.
could, or things like that. So there's just a lot of science in there. There's a lot, a bunch of stuff on dogs, but really, at the end of each chapter, there's a guide to how you can use what we know on the animal's behalf. And Jane wrote a beautiful forward for it. And there's a lot in there about Jane Goodall's Roots and Shoots programs,
Yes.
um, working for animals, people, and the environment.
Hmm.
So it's a very strongly pro-animal book, but there's also a lot in there that shows that um, when you work for animals, you could also be working for humans and their homes.
Can you
Um,
expand on that a little
yeah.
bit?
Yeah, I mean, there's a movement called the One Health movement
Hmm.
now, and it's also called the One Welfare movement. And what it basically says is what's good for them, other animals, is good for us. What's
Yes.
good for us is good for them.
Yeah.
That in and there's a strong environmental message there, that what's
Hmm.
good for us and good for them is also good for their and our homes.
I see.
Um,
Yes. Of course.
so, and it's it's r y and I've already had emails and texts about it, and, people who have pre-read drafts of it. Just simple things you can do. You can go get a job at your local humane society,
Yeah.
shoveling poop and
Yeah.
taking care of the animals
Yeah.
there. You can avoid going in areas where, animals are during breeding season,
Hmm. Right. Being
clean up.
respectful of their environments. Yeah. Being
Exactly,
respectful of them. Yeah.
leave no trace, which is a big
Yeah.
movement.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Um, you can just I've done work, parts of Roots and Shoots working with inmates and homeless.
Hmm.
Um, but I think the main message of working for animals, people, and the environment, all together, is an inclusive
Yeah.
message.
Yeah.
That no one's more important in a
Right.
special way.
Right.
But I really am a fan of the One Health movement, where that what's good for them is good for us, and what's good for us is good for them.
A hundred
Um,
percent. Yeah.
yeah.
It makes
And
sense.
what's that?
It makes sense.
Yeah, and Jane was always a fan of a couple of things. Every individual can make a difference, so we're
Hmm.
empowering people who feel that they can't make a difference. You can do very, very simple things,
Yeah.
very simple things. Um, and another thing Jane always talked about was act locally, think globally.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's great to think of, I mean, I've traveled the world and I've worked in a lot of different parts of the world, but it's nice to think that I could do things right here in Boulder, Colorado, that could help a lot of people. And people will see what I'm doing, maybe adopt or modify what I'm doing
Yeah.
depending on where they live, the culture,
Yeah.
and do it easily. And
Yeah.
that working for non-humans and humans, it can be it's cheap. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to cost anything.
Right.
I
This is
mean,
a
it may
little bit of
cost
time.
time,
Yeah.
but yeah, so we're excited about that because, we've got little vignettes in there of people who have written me, a 4th grader who just said, "I don't wanna eat animals anymore, but what can I do?" A young guy who got interested in mice, and his father was a contractor, so
Hmm.
he came up with a novel study, and his father built a mesh fence area
Uh-huh.
so they could have mice running around in a 5 by 8 or 4 by 6 area, and he could study them. I mean, what could be better than that?
That's so fascinating. That's so
You know,
interesting.
but a lot of people, they just don't know what they can do. Um, uh, you know, um, they don't know what they can possibly do because they don't understand the situation to which a lot of non-humans, and I include dogs, are subjected.
Yeah.
So, um, we spent a lot of time on that subtitle, but celebrating animal emotions and a guide to compassionate action.
Yeah.
Just simple things you can do. And like I said, a lot of it was motivated by my years of work with Jane. She wrote a beautiful forward and was real. a fan of the book because although Roots and Shoots has extended into senior living residences, into prisons and jails where I've taught, it began with youngsters.
I see.
Yeah. So, you know,
What when you're working with the homeless or you're working in prisons, what does that look like? Like what are you bringing to them?
yeah, it's a great question. I mean, when I started doing it in Boulder, some of the people running the Boulder County Jail laughed because I said, I want to teach animal behavior and
Yeah,
conservation. Um, They loved it. Videos,
sure.
everyone had a dog or a cat when they were young, or
Yeah.
a goldfish. But I love that question because part of it was motivated, especially teaching in the correction system, was that there's a lot of different ways to resolve conflict that are non-violent, non-harmful.
Yes. Interesting.
And, I wrote a book with, my friend Jessica Pierce, who's a world-renowned philosopher, and so a lot of that message was, getting back to what we were saying is that, yeah, you see aggression and violence in non-humans, but they're predominantly pro-social. Either they just are very passive about things going on because
Yeah.
it's not worth getting involved, or they resolve conflicts in a cooperative, fair, just way. And I mean, you know that I've written a lot about the golden rules of play,
Okay.
where
Yep.
there's fairness involved.
Yeah.
So when I started talking to the people who were running the Boulder County Jail, I said I want to talk about justice and fairness and resolving conflict in non-violent, more pro-social ways, and they loved it. And I could tell you, I taught it for 16 or 17 years. They wrote essays that have won awards, published in local papers. Their artwork is just unbelievable. So I would submit some of their artwork to
Mhm.
art festivals, and they've
I love
won.
that. Yeah, that's
And
incredible.
and I've had so many people tell me as recently as last year saying, "Oh, they used to call me Doctor Dog or Doctor Coyote,"
Mhm.
um, um, thanking me for giving that class and talking about compassion and justice and cooperation,
Yeah.
um, saying that it it really changed the way they viewed the world. And I want to be clear here, I'm not being judgmental. If I had
Yeah.
been reared the way a lot of these guys had been reared, I would have
Sure.
done the same thing to resolve
Right.
conflict.
Right.
And I've done a lot of work with animals, Asia, and all the bears who were tortured in the bear bile industry.
Mm.
And that really hit home to a lot of them. Uh,
Mhm.
um, and, talking about recovery and resilience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one guy wrote a beautiful article before he was released, um, about how important that work was to him in terms of recovery. That if
Mhm.
these bears could recover from being treated this way, I, meaning he, could recover.
Yeah.
Um, and and
Yeah.
and Jane visited it once, and we were supposed to be there an hour. We were there for 3 hours, and,
Sure.
they were very cautious, and, Jane said, "I don't need a guard around me,"
Yeah.
and, so that was and also for one day, it was a Wednesday some years ago, I taught it was really amazing. I taught 2 and 4-year-olds in the morning.
Mhm.
I then went to my jail class, and
Mhm.
then that night, I had formed a Roots and Shoots group in an assisted living place in Boulder
Wow.
where there were centenarians. So I used to tell Jane
Wow.
that within a 12-hour period, I taught kindergartners, inmates,
Yep.
and centenarians.
I mean,
Um,
the stories they could all tell.
yeah, right, and stuff. But really, it was motivated by talking about animal behavior and
Yeah.
talking about the importance of cooperation, fairness, and justice
Yeah.
among animals, and using fairness and justice to resolve conflict in a non-injurious way. Oh, and part of the book deals with that too,
Yeah.
because it was such a big message of Jane's.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
Yeah.
I wanted to circle back a little bit to the bond between humans and animals. What is something that maybe you learned from Jane about the bond between humans and animals, like, around the world?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Charlotte. Um, there's probably so much I've learned about
Yeah,
it, but the importance of, if you will, um, I'll call it equality. We
yeah,
talked a bit around it before.
yeah,
The importance of forming a relationship and understanding who they are,
yeah,
right? Yeah, that they're not humans, and yeah, they may be chimpanzees or coyotes or orangutans or goldfish or
yeah,
eagles,
yeah,
and trying to take their point of view because you know recently, the way Jane wanted to be described was as an ethologist and a conservationist.
uh-huh,
I mean, everybody knew her as a primatologist and a
yeah,
humanitarian, and that was because she spent so much time watching animals and trying to understand who they were in as members of their species, how they
yeah,
formed different bonds, how why bonds could, break down, if you will.
mhm,
Um, and so that was a really important message, was taking into account their sensory capacities, their motor
mhm,
capacities, that, you can form close bonds with chimpanzees and dogs and, parrots.
yeah,
But they're very different individuals. Not only, I mean, clearly, there's gonna be different sorts of parrots and chimpanzees and dogs,
yeah,
but, what might apply to chimpanzees doesn't apply to dogs or
sure,
parrots, or what might apply to all 3 of them.
yeah,
And, learning about who they are, but learning about the formation of these bonds that center on safety and trust. I mean,
yeah. It comes down to safety and trust. Yep.
it all boils down just like it does across people. I'm
Yeah,
sure you have friends who are radically different from one another, and you can
yep,
still have good, solid relationships with
yeah,
very different people. But the basic ingredient would be you and they feel safe, and you trust them and they trust you,
right,
regardless of the differences in personalities or politics or anything.
yep,
So that was really important. And, the importance of letting the animals be who they are, because from day one, I've always, working with Michael Fox, been interested in animal well-being,
yeah,
how we can give them the best, if you will, species appropriate life
sure,
we can.
yeah,
So what might work for dogs and coyotes might not work for rats and mice,
yeah,
and might not work for, other mammals,
sure, yeah,
you know, but getting back to, just that relationships are gonna vary depending on your personality and the personality of the other individual.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and and, as we close up, I've been talking about the importance of ethology. There's a philosopher named Matt Halterman, and I met him this year, although I knew some of his work, and he just came up with the phrase "slow looking."
uh-huh,
And I loved it. The first time I read it and then heard it when I heard him give a talk, is that's what ethology is all about. Careful,
yeah,
slow looking, stopping to smell the roses,
yep,
stopping to look at a dog and look at their whole body, the gestalt of where their ears are.
mhm,
How are their eyes looking?
yeah,
What's their gait?
yeah,
Are they vocalizing? Facial expressions, tail position. And that's getting back to, what goes around comes around,
yeah,
these composite signals
yeah,
that I remember about 2 years ago, I was asked to review a dog book, and I'm glad I did because I couldn't recommend it, and I don't write negative reviews, so I don't never
yeah,
know
I
what
love
happened.
that, yeah,
But it was just simply a wagging tail basically means the dog's happy.
yeah,
No, 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 it does
no,
not.
that
This, that it was an easy review. No, I
yeah,
looked in the beginning and I thought, "No, no, no, ears up, does not necessarily mean dominance. It could be they're
Yeah.
trying to locate sound. Ears
Yeah.
back doesn't mean submission. I mean, a lot of the dogs I had floppy ears,
Right.
and you could see the muscles when they pull them back,
Yeah.
you know? So
Yeah.
the reason I mention that is because Jane was an amazing scientist and observer of
Mhm.
animals.
Mhm.
The countless hours she spent alone in the early years
Yes, it's
looking
incredible.
for and, watching chimpanzees all day and then basically pulling a blanket over her and going to sleep out in the
Yeah.
wild. I
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would have done it.
That's like and that speaks to trust.
Uh, yeah, yeah, right,
Yeah.
and, right, I mean, um, people would ask me, do I think there's a reason why she was able to form these close relationships? Some of which, she, in the end, may have regretted a bit, but the
Interesting.
animals came not all of them, came to like her, and I said, "Well, she" and it was funny because it's getting back to what we started at, it's like, when I talked to my folks, I said, "I could feel the feelings in these animals when I was 3 years old.
Yeah.
And Jane could feel what the chimpanzees were feeling
Yeah.
when she went
Interesting.
into the field,
Yeah.
and that was really important. But I think the bottom line there is they have such powerful, sniffers, noses.
Yeah.
They can hear and see things we can't.
Yeah.
They and I know people think this is crazy from a scientist, but I am a scientist. They could intuit trust and safety. They
100% agree
they
with that, and
but,
I am not a scientist. Yeah.
no, right, but you might be freer to say it than I
Yeah.
might or
True, true,
Jane might,
true. Yeah.
but they could intuit trust.
Yeah.
So over the years of spending a lot of time with Jane, watching animals, but talking about them a lot and writing about them, those were really the ingredients, I think, of her success.
Yeah.
Patience,
Yeah.
learning who they were, accepting the fact they had different personalities, so there were different ways you might interact with them depending on their personality and
Yeah.
how it meshed with yours. But, the bottom line, and you hit it succinctly a few minutes ago, was, a lot of this just feeds into training, which is teaching, which is
Mhm.
educating.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
once again, you set up a situation where an animal trusts you and feels safe with you. You're going to be more successful than
Yeah.
if they're scared of you
Yeah.
because they can't predict what you would do, or you're giving off odors or visual
Yeah.
signals or sounds.
Yeah.
And they're going, wait a minute. I mean, you might not see the bubble, but the bubble
Yeah.
might be, but I thought you were my friend.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Well, my last question for you, and then I'll let you go,
that's
is
okay.
what's the most enduring thing that you've learned from dogs, either dogs you've studied or your own dogs?
The most enduring thing is, well, there's a lot, but
Yeah.
maybe just off the top of my brain would be that mutual respect and trust is reciprocal,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
read you just like other animals might.
Yeah.
So that's really, to me, is because you're and bringing in the individual. One of the messages I have in Dogs Demystified, but it's throughout Love in Their Hearts and the Emotional Lives of Animals, and I know Jane would agree with this, is that respecting each and every individual for whom they are.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, and not because of what they can do for you or because you like their personality,
Right.
but respecting them because they're alive. And
Yeah.
philosophers talk about inherent um, or intrinsic value.
Yeah.
So when you're respecting a person or another animal for what they can do for you, it's called their instrumental value.
Mhm.
No, you're just respecting them, and that, it's another time we can talk. That's the whole basis of compassionate conservation. The life of every single individual matters.
Yes.
Uh, you can't trade off 10,000 mice because there's 1,000 other mice. Those
Right.
other 1,000 mice are sentient beings with intrinsic value.
Yes.
So when you start applying those principles to your relationships with dogs, it's every individual dog is valuable. You
Yes.
may not like them because they're aggressive or they're submissive or they don't do what you like. That's irrelevant to the fact that their lives are important to them, and they should be to you.
Yeah. Yeah. That was
There's about
wonderful.
20 books there.
Yeah, I know. We covered the whole gamut.
Yeah, no, no, that's great. Well, thank you for your time and your
Yeah.
interest. It means a lot
Thank
to me.
you. If you enjoyed this conversation, I'd love it if you'd follow the show, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who loves dogs. You can find links to everything we talked about today in the show notes, and I'd love to connect with you on Instagram at BaruPup. If you have a story you'd like to share, you can email me at charlotte@thebaru.com. Thanks for listening to The Baru, and let's chat soon.